Good afternoon, class. This is our first lecture of the semester in our Human Anatomy and Physiology class. So this is Unit 1, Chapter 1, Part A. So this first chapter is an introductory chapter, and it's mostly definitions, and like I said, it's an introductory chapter. Why is it important to understand anatomy and physiology? Well, most people wonder, why do I have a fever? Why am I so achy? When we get the flu, and it would be nice to come with an owner's manual, but we don't have one for the human body. So this is the closest we have. So what is anatomy and physiology? Anatomy is basically the study of the structure of body parts and how they relate to one another. And physiology is the study of the function of those of the body parts. So anatomy is the study of both the internal and external structures of the body. And physiology is the study of how organisms perform their vital functions. So let's say someone that studies physiology might consider how a muscle contracts or what forces a contracting muscle exerts on the skeleton. Let's start looking at subdivisions of anatomy. Let's start with gross or macroscopic anatomy, which is the study of large visible structures. So structures that are usually visible with the unaided eye. And under this, we have several approaches, such as looking at the regional anatomy, which looks at all structures in a particular area of the body, for example, the head, neck, or trunk region. System anatomy looks at just one system, such as the cardiovascular system or nervous system, skeletal system. And surface anatomy is the study of general form and superficial markings. Microscopic anatomy deals with structures that cannot be seen without magnification. So for example, with a light microscope, you can see basic details of cell structures, whereas with an electron microscope, you can see individual molecules that are only a few nanometers across. Using microscopy, we can study cytology. Cytology is the analysis of the structure of individual cells, and cells are the simplest units of life. Histology is the examination of tissues, which are groups of specialized cells and cell products that work together to perform specific functions. Tissues will combine to form organs. Examples of organs are the heart, the kidney, the liver, or the brain. Also, developmental anatomy studies anatomical and physiological development through the lifetime of a human being. Embryology is the study of developments before birth. So to study anatomy, one must know anatomical terminology and be able to observe, manipulate, palpate, and auscultate. As we said earlier, human physiology is the study of the functions of the human body. These functions are complex and much more difficult to examine than most anatomical structures. As a result, there are even more specialties in physiology than in anatomy. So there are subdivisions of physiology which could be based on organ systems. For example, renal physiology, which is on talking about the kidney and its workings. Neurophysiology is the nervous system, cardiovascular physiology, and other organ systems. Physiology can focus on the cellular and molecular levels of the body. So cell physiology is the study of the functions of cells, which is the cornerstone of human physiology. Cell physiology deals with events at the chemical and molecular levels, both chemical processes within the cells and chemical interactions between cells. Just think of physicians normally will use a combination of anatomical, physiological, and psychological information when they evaluate patients. If you think back to your last trip to a doctor's office, not only they examined your body, they may have done, examined for any anatomical abnormalities, but they also asked questions about let's say, observing your movements, listening to body sounds, taking your temperatures, or even looking at chemical analysis of fluids such as blood or urine. So anatomy and physiology are inseparable. The link between structure and function is always present, but not always understood. For example, the anatomy of the heart was clearly described in the 15th century, but almost 200 years passed before the pumping action of the heart was demonstrated. An example of the complementarity of structure and function is seen in teeth. So the sharp edges of incisors make them ideal for cutting like scissors, whereas the flat surfaces of molars make them ideal for grinding. It's kind of like a mortar and pestle. One of the characteristics of living beings is this structural organization. So the human body is very organized, and if we look at its smallest component and how it's organized to form a whole organism. So we start at the chemical level, which is made up of atoms and molecules and organelles. And cellular level is the single cell, which we said is the smallest unit of life. The tissue level is groups of similar cells working together. The organ level contains two or more types of tissues. Organ system level is when organs that work closely together. And the organismal level is all the organ systems combined to make the whole organism. An example of levels of structural organization is seen here in figure 1.2. So we start with the minute atoms that will combine together. So atoms like the hydrogen atom, oxygen, carbon, they form molecules, and these molecules will form molecules such as CO2, carbon dioxide, and water, which will, some of these molecules will combine to form larger molecules called macromolecules. We will talk about those in a few classes. And these macromolecules will form organelles. So here we see a mitochondrion. We're going to talk about this organelle in a few classes as well, and its job as a powerhouse of the cell. So organelles make up are the components of a cell. So in this example, we see a smooth muscle cell. And similar cells will combine to form a tissue. And here we see that, so for example, smooth muscle tissue is found within the walls of a blood vessel. So that's at the organ level. So the blood vessel is an organ. And the blood vessel is a component of the organ system, of the cardiovascular organ system. And the cardiovascular system is part of the organism, so the organism level. So at the level of the organism, we have different types of organ systems, such as skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive system, and shown here, the cardiovascular system. Biologists have found that all living organisms share certain requirements that are necessary for life. For example, maintaining boundaries, movement, responsiveness, digestion, metabolism, excretion, reproduction, and growth, and we'll discuss each one of them. One of the necessary life functions is being able to maintain boundaries. In other words, a separation between internal and external environments. So we're going to, when we look at the structure of cells, we'll learn about the important role of the plasma membrane to be able to separate the cell and act as a selectively permeable membrane that will allow certain molecules to move in or out of the cell. Also, the skin acts as a barrier that separates the organism from its environment. Another characteristic necessary for life is movement, the ability so organisms are capable of producing movement, which could be which involves a muscular system to allow for this movement. So it could be movement of body parts via skeletal muscles. So this is an external movement, so moving through the environment, as opposed to movement of substances via cardiac muscle, so the movement of blood, or the movement of food or other materials, through smooth muscle. And this type of movement is more is internal. Contractility refers to the movement at the cellular level. Responsiveness is the ability to sense and respond to stimuli. Organisms respond to changes in their immediate environment. The withdrawal reflex will prevent injuries. So, you move your hand away from a hot stove. Also, control of breathing rate, which must change in response to different activities. Another characteristic of living organisms is digestion. It's the ability to break down ingested foodstuffs, followed by the absorption of simple molecules into blood. Organisms rely on complex chemical reactions to provide the energy for responsiveness, growth, reproduction, and movement. Metabolism is refers to all the chemical operations underway in the body. So it's the sum of all catabolic reactions, which is the breakdown of molecules, and anabolic reactions, which is the synthesis of those molecules. So many normal metabolic operations require the absorption of certain nutrients from the environment, and these nutrients are for the maintenance of the body and for as energy sources. So metabolism often generates unneeded or potentially harmful waste products that have to be removed. So, for example, urea is generated from the breakdown of proteins. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of metabolism. Feces, these is unabsorbed foods, and these have to be removed from the body. Other characteristics necessary for life functions are reproduction and growth. So for reproduction at the cellular level, reproduction involves the division of cells so that the organism can grow or repair. At the organismal level, how organisms will reproduce, creating subsequent generations of similar organisms. Growth so over a lifetime, organisms grow larger, increase in size by increasing the size or number of their cells. Humans are multicellular, that means they're made up of trillions of cells. So to function, these individual cells must be kept alive, and the way that is achieved is through the coordinated coordination of the organ systems. So there are 11 organ systems that work together to maintain life. The digestive system, actually, no, let's look at this figure. This is figure 1.3. This shows examples of interrelationships among the body organ systems. So, for example, the digestive system will take in nutrients such as carbohydrates, like sugars and proteins and lipids such as fats, and the alimentary tract will break them down, and anything that is not absorbed will be eliminated in the form of feces. So those nutrients will be absorbed, and the cardiovascular system will distribute the nutrients to all the body cells. And the respiratory system will take in the oxygen and will get rid of the carbon dioxide that is produced by the tissues. And again, the cardiovascular system is going to distribute the oxygen to all the body cells and will get rid of the waste and carbon dioxide to be disposed of within the urinary system, which eliminates nitrogenous wastes and any excess ions. So at the level of the interstitial level, nutrients and waste will pass between blood plasma and cells. The integumentary system will protect the body as a whole from the external environment. Let's start looking at the body's organ systems, the 11 organ systems. Let's start with the integumentary system. So the major organs of the integumentary system are the skin, hair, nails. We want maybe to include sweat glands as well. So its major functions are things like synthesizes vitamin D, also protects against the environmental hazards, also helps regulate body temperature, and provides sensory information through the presence of cutaneous receptors, like things like for pain, pressure. Let's look at the skeletal system. So major organs of the skeletal system are the bones, associated cartilages, bones, cartilages, associated ligaments, and bone marrow. So some functions of the skeletal system are it provides support and protection for other tissues, also stores calcium and other minerals, and will form blood cells. The muscular system is composed of the major organs are the skeletal muscles and associated tendons. And some functions are it provides movement, provides protection and support for other tissues, generates heat that maintains body temperature. The nervous system is made up of the brain, the spinal cord, peripheral nerves, sense organs, and some functions are it directs immediate responses to stimuli, coordinates or moderates activities of other organ systems, and provides and interprets sensory information about external conditions. The endocrine system is made up of the pituitary gland, pineal gland, the thyroid gland, the thymus, the adrenal gland, which are found, they're actually paired gland found on top of the kidneys, the pancreas, ovary in females, testis in males. Some functions are they will direct long-term changes in the activities of other organ systems, will adjust metabolic activity and energy use by the body, will control many structural and functional changes during development. The cardiovascular system, major organs are the heart, the blood vessels, and blood. Functions are the distribution of blood cells, water, dissolved materials, such as nutrients, waste products, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Another function is the distribution of heat and the control of body temperature. The lymphatic system is made up of the spleen, the thymus, lymphatic vessels, and lymph nodes, and functions are it defends against infection and disease, and also will return tissue fluids to the bloodstream. Major organs of the respiratory system are the nasal cavities, the sinuses, the larynx, also known as the voice box, the trachea, the bronchi, the lungs, and within the lungs are those tiny little sacs called the alveoli. They're little air sacs. Functions are to deliver air to the alveoli. That's where gas exchange occurs. Also provide oxygen to the bloodstream, remove carbon dioxide from the bloodstream, and production of sound for communication. Major organs of the digestive system are the teeth, the tongue, the pharynx, which is a common passage for both food and air, the esophagus, that long tube, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. Some functions are it processes and digests food, absorbs and conserves water, because of course we're terrestrial organisms, so we need to conserve water or else we desiccate. Absorb nutrients such as ions, water, and also the breakdown products of dietary sugars, proteins, and fats, and stores energy reserves. The major organs of the urinary system are the kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. Functions of the kidneys are the excretion of waste products from the blood. Also, the kidneys will control water balance by regulating volume of urine produced. The kidneys will also regulate blood ion concentration and pH, whereas the urinary bladder will store urine prior to voluntary elimination. The major organs of the male reproductive system are the testes, epididymis, ductus deferens, and the associated glands such as the prostate gland. There's also seminal vesicles which are not shown there. Also, there's a penis and scrotum. And the function of the male reproductive system is the testes will produce the male sex cells known as sperm, and the hormone known as testosterone. The major organs of the female reproductive system are the ovaries, the uterine tubes, the uterus, the vagina, and the mammary glands. Functions of the female reproductive system are the production of female sex cells known as oocytes and hormones such as progesterone and estrogen. It will support the developing embryo from conception to delivery, and the mammary glands will provide milk to nourish a newborn infant. Humans will need nutrients, oxygen, water, maintain a normal body temperature and an appropriate atmospheric pressure. These are several factors needed for survival. They must be in the appropriate amount. Too much or too little can be harmful. We obtain our nutrients through our diet, which contains the chemical substances used for energy and cell building. Nutrients are examples of nutrients are carbohydrates, which are the major source of energy. Proteins are needed for cell building and cell chemistry. The role of fats is for long-term energy storage. And also in nutrients are minerals and vitamins, which are involved in chemical reactions as well as for structural purposes. All the nutrients in the world are useless unless oxygen is also available. So it's essential for release of energy from foods. The body can survive only a few minutes without oxygen. Water accounts for 50 to 60% of our body weight. As we age, we have less water. And it's the most abundant chemical in the body. It provides the watery environment needed for all the biochemical reactions, all of those metabolic reactions that occur in our body. It's also is fluid-based for secretions and excretions. Normal body temperature. For chemical reactions to continue, there has to be this normal body temperature. And for humans, it's 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 Fahrenheit. So metabolic reactions would be affected. So in other words, at lower temperatures, they would slow down. At higher temperatures, they would also, it would affect the enzymes. I know we haven't talked about enzymes yet, but it would be, the enzymes are those molecules that are involved in the chemical reactions. Also, the atmospheric pressure is the force that air exerts on the surface of the body, and it's very important for adequate breathing and gas exchange in the lungs. For example, at high altitudes where atmospheric pressure is lower and the air is thin, gas exchange may be inadequate. Homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain relatively stable internal conditions despite the continuous changes in the environment, and it involves the contributions of all organ systems. The body must constantly be monitored and regulated to maintain homeostasis. Its nervous system and endocrine system play the major role in maintaining the stable internal environment. For example, the nervous system will direct rapid, short-term, and very specific responses. So, for example, let's say you accidentally put your hand on a hot stove. The heat will produce a painful, localized disturbance of homeostasis. So your nervous system will respond by causing your contraction of these specific muscles that will pull your hand away from the stove. On the other hand, the endocrine system will release the chemical messengers, they're called through hormones. And these responses may not be immediately apparent, but when the effects appear, they may persist for days or weeks. There are variables. These are factors that can change, such as, for example, blood sugar levels, body temperature, blood volume. And there are three components that control these variables: the receptor, the control center, and the effector. Okay, so let's look at these three components. So the receptor is a sensor that is sensitive to a particular environmental change or stimulus. The control center, also known as the integration center, will receive and processes the information supplied by the receptor and will determine an appropriate response. And the third component is the effector, which receives the output from the control center and provides the means to respond. And the response can either reduce the stimulus, as seen in a negative feedback mechanism, or will enhance the stimulus, as seen in a positive feedback mechanism. Most homeostatic regulatory mechanisms will involve negative feedback. Negative feedback thus tends to minimize change, keeping variation in key systems within limits that are compatible with our long-term survival. So examples of negative feedback are regulation of body temperature, which is a nervous system mechanism, and the regulation of blood glucose by insulin, which is an endocrine system mechanism. So, an example of negative feedback showing how the three parts are involved. So, the receptors will sense an increased blood glucose levels. Blood glucose is a blood sugar. The pancreas is the control center, which will secrete insulin, which is a hormone, into the blood, and insulin will cause body cells, which are the effectors, to absorb more glucose, which decreases blood glucose levels. Okay, so in figure 1.5, we'll see an illustration of how this works. So let's say there's an imbalance in the system. The stimulus will produce a change in the variable. The receptor will detect that change. Afferent pathways will bring the information to a control center. The control center will send an output along an efferent pathway to the effector, and the response of the effector is to reduce the effect of the stimulus and return the variable to an homeostatic level. So in figure 1.6, we can see another example where, in this case, body temperature is regulated by a negative feedback mechanism. So we said that the normal body temperature in humans is 37 degrees Celsius. That's when the body is in balance, in a balanced state. So let's say we look at, on the left, the stimulus is heat. So let's say the body temperature rises. There are receptors. Why would the body temperature rise? Either through, because of fever, or maybe exercise, or it's really warm outside. So there are receptors. These are temperature sensitive cells in the skin and the brain. Will send afferent pathways to the control center, the thermoregulatory center in the brain, which happens to be the hypothalamus. We're going to learn about that in next semester. And the response is sent through an efferent pathway to the effectors, which are the sweat glands. The sweat glands are activated, and the response is the evaporation of sweat. And then, as a result, the body temperature will decrease, will fall, and the stimulus ends. Now, how about if the stimulus is cold? In other words, the body temperature will drop lower than 37 degrees. This is sensed at the level of the receptors, which are temperature-sensitive cells in the skin and brain, which will send impulses through an afferent pathway to the control center, or the thermoregulatory center in the brain, which will respond through efferent pathways to the effectors, which are the skeletal muscles, which will start shivering, and the body temperature will increase and the stimulus will end. Another example of a negative feedback mechanism is with the control of blood sugar. So exercise, if we start from the left, exercise will cause a drop in blood sugar. This will stimulate the pancreatic alpha cells to release glucagon. So there are specialized cells within the pancreas to release glucagon, which is a hormone that will target the liver, and the liver is going to break down glycogen, which is a stored form of a sugar, of a carbohydrate. So it will break it down to glucose, and glucose is going to be released into the blood, and then it's going to restore blood sugar levels to a normal homeostatic level. Now, how about if let's say we eat too much? Okay, after eating a meal, for example, that will increase blood sugar levels, and that will be the stimulus to cause the pancreatic beta cells. These are specialized cells to release insulin. Insulin is a hormone that targets the fat cells, also known as the adipose cells, to take up glucose, and that will decrease blood sugar levels. In a positive feedback mechanism, an initial stimulus produces a response that exaggerates or enhances the change in the original conditions rather than opposing it. Usually in the body, positive feedback loops are often incorporated into control mechanisms in which a potentially dangerous or stressful process must be completed quickly. For example, the immediate danger from a severe cut is the loss of blood, which can lower blood pressure and reduce the efficiency of the heart. So platelet plug formation and blood clotting is an example of where we see this positive feedback loop, as well as enhancement of labor contractions by oxytocin. Figure 1.7 shows a positive feedback mechanism that regulates the formation of a platelet plug. So let's say there's a break in the blood vessel wall, which will cause bleeding. So the positive feedback cycle is initiated. So platelets, which are one of the components of blood, there's the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the third component, these platelets, will adhere to the site and release chemicals, which will initiate clotting, and additional chemicals will be released, which will attract more platelets in a positive feedback loop, and the feedback cycle will end once the plug is formed, and then the bleeding will stop. This is another example of a positive feedback loop. So the first contractions of labor, which acts as the stimulus, push the baby toward the cervix, which is the lowest part of the uterus. The cervix contains stretch sensitive nerve cells that monitor the degree of stretching. That's these sensors. These nerve cells send messages to the brain, which in turn causes the pituitary gland at the base of the brain to release the hormone oxytocin into the bloodstream. Oxytocin causes stronger contractions of the smooth muscles in the uterus, which the uterus is the effectors, pushing the baby further down the birth canal. This causes even greater stretching of the cervix. The cycle of stretching, oxytocin release, and increasingly more forceful contractions stops only when the baby is born. At this point, the stretching of the cervix stops, and this will end the release of oxytocin. Many diseases are a result of homeostatic imbalance, or the body's inability to restore a functional, stable internal environment. Aging is a source of homeostatic imbalance as the control mechanisms of the feedback loops lose their efficiency. Diseases that result from a homeostatic imbalance include heart failure and diabetes, but many more examples exist. Diabetes occurs when the control mechanism for insulin becomes imbalanced, either because there's a deficiency of insulin or because cells have become resistant to insulin. So we stop here for our first class, and we'll continue some more next time. And that's it.